This House is in session. Prior to the suspension on the 25th day of February 2025, this Honourable Chamber was in Standing Finance Committee debating the Appropriation Bill 2025. To that we shall resume.
This Honourable House is now in Standing Finance Committee. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Minister, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, I'm aware that the government has expanded the number of embassies that we have across the world. And I was going to ask, my first question, where do you now have embassies across Barbados, across the world, sorry, that Barbados has, and what successes have you been able to accomplish or achieve by virtue of having this increased or improved number of embassies to reach out to the world?
Good morning, Senior Minister. I will allow my Permanent Secretary to enumerate the embassies that we now have. Let me just speak to you on the policy matter. The purpose of the embassies, as I have said, or the diplomatic missions, is to expand Barbados's presence or diplomatic footprint. It is a turn of phrase that I like to use because essentially what we are saying is that the presence, the voice, the interest of Barbados is being now represented in a foreign capital in a better and more meaningful way. It is also done for the purpose of advancing what is a one-country team approach. And in all of these missions, we are and to some extent cooperating and collaborating with the Ministry of Tourism in order to promote and present Barbados's tourism product and to project Barbados as a destination of choice. Equally, with respect to industry, we are promoting and projecting Barbados as a destination from whence a number of useful exports can be, or in the case of the host country, imports can be derived. And similarly, in terms of culture, and you name it, we are doing that. Above and beyond that, there's also the question of our public health interface, and also the agricultural sector. We work with missions or through missions in order to ensure that we are able to attract, in some cases, the specialty skills which we need. And I use the public health system, the agriculture system. The mission in Ghana has been tremendously helpful to us in the context of nurses which have come into Barbados, and there is a cohort here of over 200 right now. We have done the same thing with Cuba. And at some stage today, I would really hope that the House allows me to elaborate on the relationship between ourselves and Cuba, especially within the context of the recent policy indication from the United States.
I hope you can elaborate on it. No.
Well, it did not arise directly from your question, but
that would be my second question.
Okay, well, we'll deal with it at your second question. And then equally, Minister, I use the example of agriculture. There are obviously a number of requirements in the agriculture sector, and there are a number of innovations that the government is trying to project and promote in order to make our agriculture sector a lot more self-sufficient and equally a lot more efficient. And so therefore relationships between ourselves and neighboring CARICOM countries like Guyana and Suriname, relationships with the Brazilians and the mission in Brazil has been tremendously helpful. As recently as this morning, I got a briefing from PS on some developments which are taking place between ourselves, Brazil and Suriname. We yesterday would have received immediately after cabinet, I don't know if you observed, the Prime Minister and myself went into a meeting, and that was a delegation which was here through the European Union, but to Norway, and the purpose of that discussion really was about ensuring that new technologies can be implemented into the agricultural sector so that we would be using containers and such like for the purposes of the growth of certain types of vegetables and fruits in Barbados. So that there are a number of purposes that the missions are serving all at once. And it is simply a matter of making sure that our presence is felt, our interest is there, or is represented there, and equally that we are able to promote some of the fundamentals that we consider to be top priority for Barbados while we are in those marketplaces. Yes, you please.
Thank you very much and good morning to all. We are present in North America, Canada and the United States. We've got a High Commission in Canada
Good
as
morning.
well.
I hate to
Joy Ann
interrupt you.
Skinner.
I hate to interrupt you.
I'm sorry. I'm Joy Ann Skinner, Permanent Secretary acting in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade.
Thank you.
My apologies. Continue in Canada, we've got a High Commission at Ottawa and a Consulate General at Toronto. In the United States, we are accredited to the Government of the United States at Washington, D.C., and we are also present at the level of Consulates General in New York and in Miami. And we've got a permanent mission to the United Nations also in New York. Outside of that, in Central America, we are in Panama, at Panama City. We are also in South America, in Venezuela at Caracas, and in Brazil at Brasilia. In the region, in the Caribbean, we're also present in Cuba at Havana. Across the water, we are in the United Kingdom at London with a High Commission. Our recently opened embassy in Ireland is at Dublin. On the continent of Europe, we are in Belgium and in Switzerland. In Switzerland, we are at Geneva, and that is serving both an embassy to Switzerland, as well as a permanent mission to the United Nations and other international organizations there. In Africa, we are in Ghana with a High Commission. It's at Accra, the capital, and in Kenya, we are at Nairobi, also with a High Commission, but we're also serving as a permanent mission to the United Nations offices there in Nairobi. In the Middle East, we are in the UAE at Abu Dhabi with an embassy, and in China at Beijing with an embassy to the People's Republic of China.
Thank you very much, Minister MPS. Clearly, a much expanded list than we had before, and I'm sure that we are obviously seeing the impact. Obviously, as heads, you saw even members from UAE and at ministerial level, we're here at heads, so shows that we're bridging those South-to-South relations. You'd mentioned Cuba, and so did your minister. So I want to go back, Minister, to Cuba and say, based on what you've been able to do and having the embassy there, what benefits have been derived for the people of Barbados for having that embassy in Cuba?
Well, it's a tremendous benefit because we have had a long history of collaboration with Cuba in terms of almost every discipline that government knows. So, for example, disaster management, relationships, they have tremendous expertise in disaster risk mitigation, that type of stuff. There has been, as I indicated before, the medical support which the Cubans have provided to not only us, but to this region, and I will come back to elaborate on that a little bit more. Sports and culture. There have been times when here in Barbados we have had Cuban coaches and so on who have been working here with some of our athletes. Cultural development, I think, speaks for itself because we've all seen the cross-fertilization of cultural experiences between ourselves and Cuba. Human resource development in terms of training, in a number of areas and various disciplines. Special education needs is one that I know some Caribbean countries have benefited from. I would not want to say specifically that Barbados has been one of them, but I know Guyana, for example, has been, and the Bahamas as well. And equally, I mentioned culture, and it came to mind just now that there's a school of arts, I believe, that has begun in Jamaica. But in terms of Barbados specifically, we have had a lot of those types of relationships. Now, perhaps I should use the opportunity to say that the matter of most immediate concern for us is a matter about which we really have to be very sober and at the same time very measured in terms of the way in which we relate to it. The fact that it has now been signaled to us that Cuban medical brigades are an undesirable aspect of what others would see as a relationship between ourselves and Cuba. And therefore, the consequences of having them working in our country would be the withholding of visas is a matter legitimately of some concern. And we're going to have dialogue on this matter. I recall before I was in this seat that there would have been a period of time when concern was raised as to whether the nature of the relationships between those people who were coming to work in some Caribbean countries and the Cuban government itself was one which could suggest that there was forced labor. I believe that the policy response at that time was to do the necessary auditing and inspection of our own systems across the region to ensure that it was the fullest transparency, that this is really a matter of functional cooperation in its purest sense. And that, honourable member, is what it is intended to be. Functional cooperation between a country that has some levels of expertise and ourselves, because we do not have that capacity as yet and we want to build it. So there's a transference of knowledge while at the same time building out your capacities, as we have seen. Now, in COVID, for example, that was not just expertise and transfer of knowledge, that was actually technical assistance, because you, like me, and most of us in here would have benefited from time to time of Cuban nurses doing the testings and so on, and working in our medical health system. It is important, it is really important though, that the temptation to respond in a manner full of testosterone does not overcome us, and that we do seek and secure a mature dialogue with our friends in the North in the United States on this matter. The consequences have been already started to be explored by some of us at foreign minister level in the region. We had a meeting as recently as this morning. And the truth of the matter is that Grenada has signaled, for example, that, if you took the Cubans out of their medical health system, their public health system in Grenada, you would be down to one anesthesiologist in the country and one cardiac surgeon. So they obviously are heavily dependent. Interestingly, so too is Jamaica, deeply intertwined with the assistance from Cuba. And it will vary from country to country. I think that what is important, and there is a book called Politics Among Nations by a gentleman called Hans J. Morgenthau. And he keeps making the point that the only permanent interest of any country is its national interest. And what is our national interest? Our national interest really with Cuba is what we have just discussed, the diplomacy of development, where we have had functional cooperation in several areas, which is the first question that you had asked me about. And the need for dialogue is absolutely necessary on this matter, so that on all sides of the Atlantic, there is an understanding of what we are trying to achieve with our relationship with Cuba. And while we respect and appreciate the angst and the concerns of those in the North, we also have to realize that the book of Matthew teaches us, Minister, that, when I was sick, you visited me. And when I was hungry, you fed me. And when I was thirsty, you gave me drink. And therefore, our voices, I think, still have to be heard in this matter, because our relationship with Cuba has been a developmental one. And frankly, when others close their doors to us, the Cubans open theirs. And so in their hour of need now, we continue to be of assistance to Cuba as best we can. I'm going to invite the Director General to share some of her own perspectives, because she has actually served on the ground in Cuba. And the fact of the matter is that she is at the centerpiece of some of the assistance that we now lend to Cuba in terms of assisting with some of their essential needs.
Thank you, Minister. Ministers, in addition to the points made by the Minister in respect of our relationship with Cuba, the fact is that engagement with Cuba, and certainly the operations of the Embassy of Barbados at Havana, have had to take place within the framework of the United States Helms-Burton law, which has extraterritorial reach. So Barbados we have been obliged to ensure that we operate within the framework of Helms-Burton, so that we cannot be accused in any way of flouting the sanctions which are imposed on Cuba. Because even though the sanctions are imposed on Cuba and on the Cuban state, the impact of those sanctions redound on the operations of every country that engages with Cuba. And we have been careful to ensure that any assistance that we give to Cuba fits within the framework of Helms-Burton and qualifies as humanitarian assistance. So even though, we have sought within the framework of Helms-Burton to find ways that we can continue to develop our relationship, we have always ensured that Barbados is in compliance. In respect of the nurses, for example, who had served in Barbados during the COVID time, one of the things that we did, and mindful of the US concerns about human trafficking of Cuban officials, one of the things which we were certain to do is to ensure that every Cuban hired during that time had their own bank account, so that Barbados was not paying any funds directly to the Cuban authorities in a way that could bring us under the scrutiny of the United States administration. So certainly as we go forward, we have to review the arrangements in place, because in addition to the nurses, there are also coaches and other officials whose expertise Barbados may need to call upon from time to time. Certainly as we seek to fill the skills deficit in Barbados. And we certainly will have to ensure that we do the necessary to ensure that we operate within the framework of the Helms-Burton agreement and extraterritorial reach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My final question before I come back has to do with the Economic Partnership Agreement. I was just thinking back, it's almost 20 years now that I was the representative for the ACP-EU, And I'm seeing the member for St. James North smiling because I replaced him, I believe, as the representative. Or he replaced me, I think, something like that. But he was the representative at some point. The member for St. Michael East as well, I think, was also a representative for the ACP-EU non-ministerial meeting that's held in Geneva or other places and so on across Europe. And it was hard work to try to negotiate EDFs and the EPAs and so on. And I think you're now on, I guess, the 14th, 13th EPA now? What EPA you're on now? The 14th, something like that. But if you could elaborate for the benefit of the people here, and obviously those listening, what is the status of the negotiations and what benefits have redounded to Barbados with that agreement, with the economic partnership agreement with the European Union and the region?
Minister, you have been overtaken by the events. Yes, when you were doing that work, which you did admirably on behalf of the government and people of Barbados, we were negotiating in the economic partnership agreement. Then subsequent to its being signed, Europe developed a slightly different perspective in terms of their own partnership. It is now an ACPS, Association of Caribbean and Pacific States, Africa, Caribbean and Pacific States, with the EU partnership. There are now a number of different approaches taken by Europe, including a gateway, I believe it is called, where regional businesses are being given opportunities. And in fact, as you pointed out in your very first intervention, the President of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, was here in Barbados, and this is a first for this region. The first time that we've had that high-level ranking official from Europe come here. And part of what she wanted to do was, within the same principle of the Global Gateway Initiative, extend to us opportunities to supply Europe with energy, green energy. And so therefore, the need now to take the renewable energy capacity that we have, translate it into ideally green hydrogen, because that is the way in which it could be transshipped. And Europe, again, provides us an opportunity. It opens its door for us to be able to sell to them such energy as we are able to generate. In addition to that, we had a partnership, another aspect of the agreement which was signed in Samoa, and I'm trying to remember when it would have been November or so of 2023. And that Samoa partnership generated some discussion in the region, largely because of the fact that it took us where I suppose culturally some people are uncomfortable in going. But again, part of interfacing with the wider world is to give us a chance to reflect a little bit on how we do things and whether what we do is really satisfactory. If I recall correctly, one of the areas of greatest concern was the desirability expressed by the Europeans and signed on to by the vast majority of having our young children be exposed to education in schools about their sexual reproductive rights. And again, as a parent of a young child, I believe that that is something that we need to seriously look at, because what we fail to recognize is that around the world, and let us not fool ourselves, to some extent here in the Caribbean as well, there are those who will have a very predatory posture towards young people, underage boys and underage girls, and unless we try to set up some guardrails and to help them to start to think at an early age about what they may or may not be getting themselves involved in, understanding choice, understanding what permissions mean and how permission to do anything can have its consequences. Those are conversations which we really do need to have, and that is part of what that discussion and that arrangement was about. In the context of wider trade, we have been ongoing with the Europeans. I believe that the arrangement with Europe continues to to grow. I have said on the first day that we had the ministry in this well, that I have a challenge, and I think the challenge is sometimes that we are a little bit too complacent. I go back to the point of mutual accreditation agreements. You, Minister, are a professional in your own right and have practiced outside of Barbados, as have I in my own profession. And you know that it is an opportunity for those of us who have benefited from university education and secondary education to be able now to become foreign exchange earners in our own right. But if we do not have accreditation agreements, recognition of accreditation agreements, then we do not allow for those who have the skill sets that the country has invested in to maximize the opportunities that are at their doorstep. And so, again, if I use my own profession, for example, Suriname is part of CARICOM, and under the rules of CARICOM, there should be freedom of movement and freedom to establish in Suriname, and there is. But it is useless to the average lawyer in Barbados, because even if he chose to go there, the accreditation issue is still going to stand in his way. And we've just brought Martinique into the mix, and the rules will allow you to establish in Martinique. But if you chose to do so, the accreditation issues will stand in the way of those who go into Martinique. And we have to make sure, therefore, that we move with alacrity as a region. And this is a matter which we are trying to put onto the front burner again, because it did flounder between December 2007 when the EPA was signed, and I would say 2018, 2019 when new administrations came into the region again and recognized that these were deficiencies that had not been faced and fixed and wrestled to the ground. I hope that satisfactorily answers your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Minister, I will come back. In particular, I'm interested in improved free movement within CARICOM. I did hear you say that, there was a discussion about those parties that want to establish that free movement are free to do so, but it'd be interesting to hear more on that topic. But I will save that for when I come back. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to all. And since the Honourable Senior Minister for Christchurch West ended on ACP-EU, which is what I was going to take up on, it just would make an expanded statement from what Honourable Foreign Affairs Minister said. The Samoa agreement is in effect signed on the 15th of November. There was some pushback from some religious organizations urging Jamaica and Trinidad and the other islands who had not signed when we signed on the opening. But all the Caribbean countries, essentially, maybe one or two exceptions, I think only one, but all the CARICOM countries have signed. Trinidad signed, and Tobago earlier this year. About April last year, Jamaica signed as well. There was also pushback from what the Foreign Affairs Minister said on sexual and reproductive health, on abortion issues. And that was not an issue for us, because we have had abortion, termination of pregnancy legislation in Barbados for over 40 years. A lot of the CARICOM countries don't have that as yet. So we had absolutely no problems in signing that. But Honourable Minister, Senior Minister, I want to give you the opportunity to speak as to where the world is at in terms of the initiative which emanated from us, from the Honourable Prime Minister, 3 years ago, the Bridgetown Initiative, and we're hearing about Bridgetown Initiative 3.0. So I want to give you the opportunity to tell this Parliament and, this country, both here and abroad, where that initiative which emanated from our government, our Prime Minister, our country is at.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And let me take the opportunity to thank you for the work that you now do in the capacity that the Honourable Senior Minister who preceded you had done with the European Union. Honourable Member, Mr. Chairman, I call to mind an observation which had been made, I believe it was loosely made in a speech, that, you know, when they came for the communists, I did nothing because I was not a communist. And then they came for the trade unions and I did nothing because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews and I did nothing because I was not a Jew. And eventually they came for me, but there was no one left to speak for me. And that really is how it is with the question of the planet. There are those who have chosen out of either convenience or to turn a blind ear or a convenient eye on the situation as it confronts our planet. I think we are fortunate, Mr. Chairman, to have a leader of government that has not chosen the pathway of least resistance or to recline herself on a cushion of comfort, but has rather chosen to walk on a bed of nails and ask the world as a whole to consider the reality of what is happening to the planet, especially as it impacts on small states. That she has done so has seen some fruit, because right now the Prime Minister of Barbados has been selected as the leader of what is called the Climate Vulnerable Forum. It is a global partnership of states which are disproportionately affected by climate and by the climate crisis. Its mission is to engage the industrial powers of the world in relation to the social and the economic vulnerabilities which confront some of our small states and which are consequential upon the climate crisis. Barbados raised its voice on this matter because we believe formally, or I should say fundamentally, that there is and there should not be a clash between a choice on one hand of what you do to protect the interests of your people, and on the other hand, what you do to protect the interests of the planet. And that is what gave birth to the Bridgetown Initiative, which is now in its second or third iteration. The idea behind it is also about increasing and redirecting the flow of finance, what is called or the financial architecture. And we are trying to ensure that there is a reshaping of the international financial system. And why is that important? It is important because you want to make sure that the globe as a whole now understands that there is a connection financially between the planet within which we live and the way in which countries, especially those who are the most vulnerable, are predisposed almost, but certainly affected by the way in which some of the climate changes impact upon us, and we are disproportionately affected in that way. To condescend to some specifics, issues like sea level rise, about which this country really does not speak sufficiently among ourselves, but it is a reality confronting all small island states. If you think about the reality of sea level rise, you're recognizing already that in the islands of the Pacific, some countries have been or are in danger already of being swallowed up. Large portions of their land mass, their terrestrial space, has already gone underwater. Ask ourselves for a moment to pause and think of a west coast of Barbados where Paynes Bay has started to disappear, where Fitz Village has disappeared, where Prospect has disappeared. That is the existence of some states in the Pacific. The other issue of drought, we understand in this country only too well because the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister of Barbados had to come to the nation in 2023, I believe it was, with a special arrangement in place in order for us to mitigate the use and conserve the use of our water, because for the first 5 months of that year, we had rainfall which was 53% below the average for the last 30 years or so. The question of extreme weather events and storms, I don't have to tell anybody in this house about that, because we've all lived on that, with that reality, and we understand. And in fact, top of mind should be Hurricane Beryl, which had its own peculiar impact on us only a few months ago. And then, of course, there's the question of loss and damage. The consequences of these events has been that serious loss physically and financially has been incurred. And as a result of that loss being incurred, Mr. Chairman, there has to be some way of recovery. Now, what has been the successes of Barbados raising the gaze of the world to these issues, and the voice of the Prime Minister being a leading voice in this matter? And people like to belabor the fact that obviously, if you are going to lead a group like the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which is 68 or 70 countries, I can't remember off the top of my head, you're going to have to be doing some traveling, you're going to have to be doing some negotiating, you're going to have to be doing some advocacy and some lobbying. It can't all be done from Bridgetown, Barbados, though we have brought several people here to Bridgetown, Barbados to see firsthand, for example, the way in which our West Coast and our other aspects of our country are being reshaped as a result of the climate crisis. We've had successes. The so-called debt pause clause, which is really a pause on the repayment of debt for a period of 2 years or so in the aftermath of let's say, a hurricane, and the opportunity given to the government of the country affected to be able then to say, I no longer have to repay this debt on a monthly basis or annual basis for 2 years. What I can now do is to take the money that I would have otherwise to look for and repurpose it for the purposes of ensuring that I can rebuild the schools that get knocked down, that I can replace the hospital and the polyclinic that got damaged, that I can ensure that the airport is functional again. In the case of Beryl, that the fishing marinas are able to operate as they did before, that the Bridgetown Harbor can be repaired. Those are the real man on the street, very realistic issues that we've had to confront, and that we now have been able to get multilateral development banks, the people who lend countries money, to understand that you write into the contract of a loan that there is a provision for a state in those circumstances to be able to benefit. That is a direct benefit of what we have been doing with the Bridgetown Initiative. Again, another success has been the ability to get the IMF, International Monetary Fund, to review their policy on surcharges. On every loan, there is a surcharge attached to it as a means of managing the way in which you treat the loan and making sure that the person who is borrowing or the country that's borrowing is being responsible. And we have said to them that, look, the surcharges are making loans more expensive than they need to be, and we need to revise that policy. And in the case of Barbados, it has not only successfully been done, but it now saves us, I believe we now save something in the vicinity of $12 to $16 million every year as a result of that. And then, of course, the question of governance of the international institutions, the multilateral development banks. These were entities created after World War II. We were colonies then. Nobody took us as being significant. But we have to have a voice in today's world. And so, therefore, there's now an acceptance that we must rethink governance and have representatives. I think it has been agreed that Africa will be represented on the board of the World Bank. I know for sure that there's, at the United Nations, again, a space will be made and Security Council for the African countries, and others like us who are exposed disproportionately to the climate crisis. So I think, Honourable Member, that is about as far as I could go within the time allocated to me to explain to you where we are and what the Bridgetown Initiative really is about.
Thank you, Honourable Senior Minister. I will next move on to our relations with China. very important. China, of course, 1.4 billion people. Second largest population in the world, I believe surpassed around the middle of last year by India, according to the official statistics. And it was this party in government that, 47 years ago, entered into diplomatic relations with China. At the same time, I believe, as Trinidad, Jamaica, and Guyana did. And we've had very good relations with them. After all, we're friends of all, satellites of none. And certainly last year, many members of this parliament traveled to China on official business. You, Honourable Chairman, accompanied me on one visit. We know the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister went, Honourable Senator in the other place, now Minister of Educational Transformation, he went right after us. I believe Senior Minister of Christchurch West also went. China is an opportunity for us in terms of expansion of business, and our rum, which is the #1 rum in the world, and just up to last year's budget and financial statement, I think it was 2 years ago, Honourable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance spoke about expansion of our rum industry, and that we need to export more rum, and I believe this is an opportunity, one of many opportunities we have for China, in spite of the far distance. And I want Senior Minister to give you the opportunity to tell us about our relations with China as they stand at this time.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Our relationship with China continues to grow from strength to strength. And I take the opportunity to say to you that you're quite right. I think it was in 1967 that the late national hero, the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow, who obviously would have been Prime Minister of Barbados at that time, made that very profound statement, which has been honored. It's a time-honored statement. I think there's been no government of the country that has departed from it, that we will see ourselves as friends of all and satellites of none. What I think people often forget is that he went on to say that ours will be a diplomacy not of power, but a diplomacy of development. And in many regards, therefore, as with Cuba, we have found a development partner with China. It offends some people apparently because they look only at the ideology of the country without recognizing that we are able to and have successfully been able to navigate the simplistic ideological issues and deal really with simple development issues as we treat to the country of China. And in so doing, we've been able to sit at a table of negotiation and with respect, tell them that we do not share necessarily their perspective on a number of things. But having said that, as one developing country to another, we believe that there is room for us to have dialogue on matters of mutual concern and of significance. I'm happy to say that with this administration, China was very pleased as they themselves came to realize that the smog which would have been in Beijing and the burning of coal and so on, which for an industrial nation is not necessarily the most efficient way to go forward, was not necessarily either the best way of doing business for them. And they were quite pleased to recognize that we have an ambition, which is to see ourselves entirely fossil-free, dependent on fossil fuels by 2035. And so therefore, issues then of mutual significance and importance become easy to discuss. Renewable energy. And as a result of that meeting of minds, entirely free of ideology, entirely free of ideological constraints and constructs, we are talking now about simple development and what is the most efficient way of taking a country forward. China has decided that it will move full speed ahead in the sphere of renewable energy and has now become one of the leaders in the world in terms of its production and output of renewable energy vehicles. I believe that there are a few members of this cabinet who now drive some of those renewable energy vehicles which have been imported into Barbados. Equally, they have assisted us in terms of low-cost financing because of our own developing country status, to be able to access a fleet of electric buses, which I think is not a strange development to anybody in this place. And that fleet is being expanded. I believe that there is another, there are 59 electric buses on the roads now, and there are another, I don't want to hazard a guess, but I think it is roughly 60 odd that are supposed to be here in early May, I am advised. In similar measure, we have been able to last year we visited, or was it year before? We visited Beijing, met with President Xi Jinping himself, and had discussions about our ambitions in terms of sports. And in an effort to collaborate with us as a developing country, China has lent substantial technical expertise and advice in terms of the design and the work to be done on a national stadium for Barbados. That work continues apace, and we are still very much engaged with the Chinese on the national stadium, which will obviously place our young athletes and indeed our more senior citizens in a position to ensure that we have the very best of not only sports but personal health care as well. The education sector has also benefited. I believe that at Duke's there is a food processing or food skills center which is being built with the assistance of the Chinese, and also at Hope as well. And this is a collaboration between our Ministry of Education or the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus here in Barbados, and the government of Barbados with the government of the People's Republic of China. In terms of trade, it is correct to say that Barbados rum is now on the shelves of the Chinese commercial places, and similarly, there is a hope that one day we will have more tourism from China. That is long-haul tourism by any stretch of the imagination. It's not something that can happen tomorrow morning, but the important thing is that you put the frameworks in place. And so therefore, recognizing Barbados as one of those destinations for whom permissions will be granted for that type of travel. Because remember, we are still talking about a social and economic structure that is very different from ours. In our case, you get a passport, go on a plane, and sometimes you don't even tell your boss that you're leaving the island. More requirements are necessary on the Chinese side. But these are the discussions that have been taking place, and as I just indicated, there is a lot of fruit that has been harvested from the tree, and long may it continue.
Thank you, Senior Minister. Now, with your permission, Honourable Chairman, I'll direct attention to Africa. I believe that it is an indisputable fact that this administration has made the most concerted efforts, more than any other previous administration, to develop relations with the African continent and our African diaspora. The only other time in my recollection we have made such an effort was in the last term of office, 71, 76 of the Right Excellent Errol Barrow, when we had quite a few cultural exchanges with Africa. I remember going to the then newly built National Stadium and seeing, I think it was South Africa and Botswana, other cultural shows with Africans who came to Barbados on official cultural shows. And Honourable Senior Minister, I want to give you the opportunity to speak in wider detail. I know you mentioned it briefly in terms of our relations, our thrust into the African continent, and why clearly you believe this is of benefit to our country in an era where, you know, our relations, as you have said earlier, with our traditional partners, United States and others are clearly, especially within the last few weeks, are going to be challenged, and where multilateralism, which had prefaced relations, global relations, is now under threat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. And let me then begin on the question of multilateralism, because as I said at the very outset, I philosophically remain aligned, and I think I am fixed and immovable on this question of the importance of multilateralism. Many states coming together in order to find common understanding, to find partnership, to find purpose in the broader interest of peace and prosperity, and quite frankly, as I just indicated, on the climate matter, on the well-being of our planet. And I think that is something that is a fundamental. My view is that for a small island like Barbados, with a shrinking population, now down back virtually to 266,000 again, we would have no voice, and we would simply be rendered irrelevant if we do not find partnerships with others. And we have to find partnerships, in my judgment, Mr. Chairman, with states that are like-minded and that are in a similar development dimension and are prepared to prioritize some of the things that we consider to be fundamental. The development trajectory of the country, the protection, again, of the planet and the environment. These are common issues that we will find synergy with other states on. Africa is one of those states, and it is pregnant with potential, pardon the pun. I believe, Mr. Chairman, the history of the administration is very clear. We opened a mission in Kenya. We opened a mission in Ghana. I have already indicated the fruits of that in a very real sense, because there are folks lying down in a bed in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital now, or in a polyclinic somewhere in Barbados, who are being treated, as I speak, by Ghanaian nurses, sourced through the efforts of the mission over there. Success, we have been recognized by Africa in the context of being the sixth dimension of the African Union, so that the advocacy and the outreach and the partnership has now come to a point where the African Union sees itself not only now South Africa and West Africa and East Africa and Central Africa and North Africa, but also seeing the Caribbean and the diaspora and the leadership in the Caribbean as the sixth dimension of the African continent. That in itself will bear more fruit on the 7th of September this year, because there will be the first ever in-person summit between the heads of state and government of the African Union and the CARICOM heads in Ethiopia on the 7th of September of this year. And obviously on that agenda will be issues of mutual concern. How do we treat to the question of the planet and climate? How do we treat to the question of reparations? And also more economically advantageous issues to us in the context of commerce and commercial development. Mr. Chairman, the Honourable Member has asked a question which now begs me to go even further. We have to recognize that this country, and by extension this region, is short on skills. And there are some skill sets that are absolutely necessary if Barbados is going to continue to work the way Barbados is expected to work. Right now, the Kenyan High Commissioner should be on the ground in Ethiopia, or if he's not there yet, will be there soon, engaging with the Ethiopians on issues relating to those skill sets, because we are trying, as we did with the nurses in Ghana, to be able to source skills out of Ethiopia as well. And what are some of those fundamental skills? We keep talking about renewable energy and our renewable energy effort, but we do not have the technical expertise in terms of electrical engineers, electricity generation specialists, but we must do electricity generation planning. The Honourable Senior Minister with responsibility for infrastructure needs to have electrical generation planning capacity and transmission planning capacity if this country is to be satisfactorily serviced in terms of our renewable energy effort. Equally, economic statistics are exceptionally important. You can't manage an economy saying, I feel that so-and-so is the case, or so-and-so used to happen, and it should happen. There needs to be precision. You need to have those people who are specialized in economic stats and social and demographic statistics. That is necessary for the functioning of the Barbados Statistical Service. We are trying to source those skill sets. Again, a basic requirement, math teachers. They are needed in the Ministry of Education. And you don't walk down every street and butt upon somebody who can be or is a specialist math teacher. We know that this government has had to endure hacks in some of our sensitive installations and institutions, cybersecurity specialists. So the conversation is being had in Africa to source some of those skills. It is being had with India to source some of those skills. There will be a High Commissioner from India on the ground within 2 weeks' time, and the dialogue with him specifically is going to be along the same lines of skills, servicing some of the skills deficits that we have in Barbados. So, Honourable Member, I say to you that that is the way in which we see Africa. Obviously, tourism is one of those things that we continue to work on, and the aviation links are matters of discussion. I wish that it could happen faster, but there is an economic requirement and an economic imperative. And anybody who is really serious about this accepts it. Above and beyond being able to thump our chest and say a plane has arrived, we want to keep a route serviced. We want to know that the plane can be filled when it leaves Barbados and go back to Africa, and we want to know it's going to be filled from Africa to Barbados. And 3 and 4 trips is not going to do that. It has to be able to be done every day of every week, or at least a couple days a week of every week. And therefore, the economics of it is what is being discussed and worked through. There are certainly expressions of interest. There's a genuine willingness now on the part of some of the African heads of government with whom the Prime Minister and I have met last we were up there a couple of weeks ago, to assist us in getting this off the ground by seeding, as they put SWD, put some money behind the flights. But the fact of the matter is, it can't only be reliant on government subsidy. That would not be good financial husbandry. And so therefore, what we are aiming at is to make sure we can create the right framework. We will help it get off the ground, but then you must, pardon the expression, keep it in the air.
Thank you, Honourable Senior Minister and Honourable Chairman. My last intervention at this point.
Honourable Member, you don't have any more interventions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm asking honourable members, I see a number of persons who have indicated they wish to be involved in this particular, under this particular head, and I'm therefore asking you, in order to be able to give opportunity to all, I want persons to stick within your time limits and so that everyone gets the opportunity to request or make their contribution. Christchurch West Central.
Thanks, Chair. I want to engage you, Minister, with what I call a real conversation today. There is a lot of what I would call mesospheric noises in Barbados about travel, whether it be the Prime Ministers or ministers. And I want to say on record that the cost associated with travel hasn't really changed over the last 20 years. I want to say on the record that that's a fact. And what I want to say though, because it is not only the cost, but it is the returns. We know in the international sphere that Barbados has been able to benefit from its international appeal. You heard about the New Deal as it relates to debt for nature swaps. You've heard about the new climate swap that will obviously help us in terms of our water shortage that we are experiencing as the 15th most water scarce country in the world. You heard about grants from Jeff funding. In my ministry, there is the Regional Soil Care Project that we are doing with grants from Jeff, $2 million. The Thor Gecko project that we are doing up at the BDF complex in Christchurch, another $500,000. And you can go on and go on all across the country and see where we have benefited. You spoke earlier about the Bridgetown Initiative 3.0, which has basically disrupt the financial disadvantageous architecture as we know it, so that not only Barbados, but other developing countries can benefit from having loans at concessionary rates, 4%, 2%, whatever, so that we would not be disadvantaged, recognizing, of course, that we contribute very little to the climate change, but we are faced with the harshest and most adverse reactions from it. We know all of this. This is on record as I speak, that this has the benefits of our engagement, multilateral, bilateral, whatever. My question is that the man from Silver Hill, in the good fulcrum and epicenter of Christchurch, house from the Silver Hill area, he wants to know, as a shopkeeper, albeit that we are talking about all these international things and the dimensions that we have changed since we come to government, he wants to know how it benefits him. The little vendor in his village, she wants to know how does that engagement, albeit all of the, as I said, the noises, how does that benefit her so she can have more disposable income to buy product? The jet ski operator in whole town, he wants to know that as well. The guy who was doing the ladder work in all his things, he wants to know it. The question I want to ask, how does our engagement benefit the man, the small businessman, the man on the streets, those persons who we will call the blue-collar workers that are indeed in need of this trickle-down benefits? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, the tone and tenor of your question suggests to me that you are reflecting on the the comments which were made by the Leader of the Opposition about travel when he was here on participating on the day that this aspect of this debate began. He then threatened that he would have a number of questions for me arising out of travel, but of course he has not presented himself to do so, and certainly failed to do so when he was present. And I am not surprised, Honourable Member, because I do not take the Leader of the Opposition seriously on these matters. I invite you to cast your mind back. I will never forget the 22nd of October 2024, when this Parliament was engaged in a debate on a matter relating to the maritime space, I believe piloted by the Minister of International Transport. And then, despite the front page of that day's Nation newspaper indicating that over $100 million was being secured from the World Bank, I believe it was, by the Prime Minister, who was overseas at that time in Washington, D.C., working on that particular loan being settled so that we could get fisher folk in this country back to work again, the House was treated to a form of performance that was shocking, because the government was berated for doing nothing, that we did nothing to help the fishing industry, that the sector was being ignored. All of that we heard while the front page of the paper was telling us precisely where the Prime Minister was, where she had traveled to, what business she was upon, and ironically that the business she was upon was precisely that about which she was being lambasted in the Parliament of Barbados behind her back. So I do not take the honourable member who is leader of the opposition seriously on these matters. I will go further. I know that the Prime Minister of Barbados had to go and meet in Europe with leaders of the European Investment Bank. I know that the Prime Minister of Barbados would have had to go to meet with the leadership of the Inter-American Development Bank on the question of guarantees for this country, financial guarantees with respect to the debt for climate swap, which is a historic swap, a historic, first of its kind. It was about replacing some of the outstanding, very expensive interest rate, bad debt incurred by the Democratic Labour Party, and effectively saying we will, inviting the Green Climate Fund to take that back and reissue debt to the extent of which we would then see 125 million Barbados dollars, I believe it was, in savings on that reissued debt and it would be guaranteed, the repayment guaranteed by the European Investment Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, and that it would be for the specific purposes of enhancing water management, water resource management in Barbados. And what did that mean specifically, Mr. Chairman? It meant that in the constituency of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, where you have Worthing, you would have an upgrade of the South Coast Sewage project. You would have a tertiary treatment plant being created along that South Coast, protecting nearshore reefs on the beaches of the constituency of the same Leader of the Opposition. I do not take the Leader of the Opposition seriously when he performs in the House, and that is the only term I would use. With respect to the question you ask about the wider benefits of some of the travel, the honourable member would know, because he's in the Ministry of the Environment, that the Green Climate Fund granted to Barbados, not lent, granted 40...
Honourable member, you have 1 minute.
Granted, thank you, sir, granted $40 million for the purpose of building water resource capacity for the Barbados Water Authority. That was negotiated again by virtue of travel. So the ordinary farmer in Barbados gets the benefit of augmented water supply as a result of that travel. Mr. Chairman, I indicated just now, go back to China again. The fact that we are able to secure, first of all, 59 buses from China and now another 60, that doesn't happen by remaining in Bridgetown, Barbados. The effort to rebuild a national stadium for our sportsmen and women, that doesn't happen by remaining in Barbados. I spoke about the savings we get when we have managed to meet in Washington, D.C. with the IMF in order to get them to revise for the first time their policy on surcharges on loans. That has saved this country every year at least 12 to 16 million. It doesn't happen by staying in Bridgetown, Barbados. Mr. Chairman, I could go on and on. The fruits of the effort of travel are reflected in the financial benefits that are now accruing to the country and to the people of the country, and to the efforts that government agencies are making in order to have a better and more prosperous life for our people.
I just want to follow up by asking you to extrapolate a little more on those tangible benefits for the small persons in this country, homeowners, business people, etc.
Well, okay, let me just go back through some of them again. If I can make sure that the South Coast has tertiary treatment of water, I protect my nearshore reefs, If I'm protecting my nearshore reefs, then I'm making sure I believe that those people who are nearshore fishermen are better able to sustain their livelihood. If I'm making sure that the reefs are not destroyed by toxic chemicals, et cetera, going into the water, I am making sure that we protect the tourism industry in this country. If I am able, Mr. Chairman, to have an enhanced water resource management, I am able to make sure that farmers, wheresoever they are located in Barbados, have better access to water. If farmers have better access to water, it means they have better chance of having better crop yield. And if they have better crop yield, it means they have a better opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to make money by the sale of their crops. In the context of a country which experienced a couple years ago rainfall that was 53% below the 30-year average, that is a vital and important thing. Pigs will die of thirst. Cows will die of thirst. Chickens, Mr. Chairman. So we have to make sure that we're able to look after the farmers. In the context, sir, of the buses that are coming into the country, those buses provide transportation for people to go about their ordinary day-to-day business. Everybody in Barbados does not have a motor car, but they may have a job, or they may have a small business, and they need to get from where they live to where their place of employment is. And so therefore, an effective functioning bus system is critical for the country. I do not know that I can break it down any further than that. To me, the benefit of having access to funding, and if you travel with a view to negotiate and you are successful in advocating for and negotiating about getting better access to financing in this country, then you create opportunities for business to develop in this country, an opportunity for Barbadian people, whether large or small economically, to be able to continue to grow and to survive.
My final question. Barbados signed on through CARICOM to the BBNJ, biological diversity beyond our national jurisdiction. I would not be true to myself if I did not add a voice to this. I want to congratulate your ministry and its role that it played in ensuring that Barbados is part of this new dimension as we seek to fulfill our obligation to realize 30% of our biodiversity by the year 2030. As I said before, when I piloted our National Biological Strategic Action Plan, it must not be an acquiescence to a United Nations General Assembly call. It must be a Barbadian call. And I know your ministry would have done a lot of work, because that is the third implementing agreement to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the BBNJ. I am aware that the next meeting, in the not too distant future, the agreement will be at the level of the United Nations, and Barbados, obviously as part of our CARICOM brothers and sisters, will be part of that agreement. We understand the importance, recognizing that that ocean space beyond our jurisdiction is in the world about 93.3%. It can liberate 50% biodiversity with good intention. We understand all of that. Your ministry would have played an integral role in ensuring that Barbados is able to sign on for this agreement. I want you to elucidate for us about this role you would have played and the importance of Barbados signing on to a treaty which would basically save the world in its long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. And Minister, let me say to you that this question touches on a couple of things that maybe we have only spoken to in a tangential way. First of which is that we have the benefit of having as a non-resident ambassador, the Deputy President of the Senate, the Most Honourable Elizabeth Thompson, who really is, if I go back, not to leave BBNJ, I will come back there, but go back to the Climate Vulnerable Forum. She is the Sherpa, or those who will give guidance on, or that person who will give guidance on this matter of climate vulnerability, and that grouping of countries, which I say is either 68 or 70, who are interrogating the issue of climate with some of the industrialized powers on Earth. With regard to BBNJ, she's also our ambassador with respect to the law of the sea, the United Nations law of the sea. And therefore, it is through her and others in the ministry, like Senior Foreign Service Officer Tyrone Brathwaite, who I'm going to invite to speak to this matter also, that we are able to do those things that we do beyond boundaries of our national jurisdiction. You will recall, Honourable Member, at the very early start of this presentation today, I made the point that there are some considerations which are fundamental, certainly for me. I believe that we have, in the shaping of our foreign policy, to be looking at matters of not just people, but also the prosperity of the people of this country, the protection of the planet. We must, in the effort to do that, because we are so small, be able to build partnerships, and we want to ensure, as a result of all that we do, that we can have a peaceful coexistence on this planet. Now, beyond boundaries of national jurisdiction, has been a global agreement where we now have a legally binding instrument under the UN, the United Nations Conference of the Law of the Sea, to have the sustainable use of our marine biological diversity, and that is beyond the national jurisdiction of Barbados. It therefore means that fundamental considerations such as what do we do about the maritime space's genetic resources? How do we ensure that they are fairly managed? How do we ensure that those resources are treated equitably and not swallowed up by one particular country in an unseemly way? We have had very recent experience of a country on a bended knee at war, struggling for its survival. And there are those who report that that country is being told that its mineral wealth should be deposited at the disposal of somebody else in order for that country to benefit from assistance. Now, there is another perspective about the way global governance should work, and that there is a need for some equity and for some degree of fairness in the way in which one treats the genetic resources, and especially in the maritime space. This is an untested area, but we are breaking new frontiers or finding new frontiers, and we want to do so in accordance with what we consider to be best practices. Measures such as area-based management of the maritime space and maritime protected areas, and then the need, of course, for capacity building. Because again, small states like ours do not have the capacity, even though we have tremendous space, far more space than we have terrestrial space, 425 times more water, marine space around Barbados than there is our terrestrial land space. But the building of capacity to manage resources that may exist out there, the transfer of marine technology, is another matter of concern and interest to us. Now, the aim, therefore, is about building consensus around the way in which we conserve, the way in which we have sustainability in that ecosystem. And I would invite the I almost said honourable member, I would invite the Senior Foreign Service Officer behind me, Mr. Brathwaite, to elaborate further on this.
Good morning. Thanks, Minister. My name is Tyrone Brathwaite. I'm Senior Foreign Service Officer with current responsibility for human rights and multilateral relations in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. The matter of the BBNJ agreement is one of significant import for Barbados, in that the oceans really represent the final frontier for large ocean states such as Barbados. The Minister alluded to the fact that our ocean space, ocean space that Barbados has jurisdiction over measures some over 400 and or well over 400 times the size of our land space. But beyond that, there is an area recognized under UNCLOS as the common heritage of mankind called the area that goes beyond, that is the area of maritime space beyond national jurisdiction of all states or all coastal states on the planet. And the resources in that maritime space is, as I just said, the common heritage of mankind, and is there not for ownership by any one particular country or group of countries, or any one entity within any country, but is there for all of us who occupy this planet, live on this planet. Barbados was instrumental in the negotiation of the BBNJ agreement. We co-led the CARICOM effort in those negotiations alongside the government of Belize. The minister pointed to certain aspects of the agreement that are particularly important, and I will point to 4 that concerned the Caribbean region, or the CARICOM region as a whole, and these are access to marine genetic resources, and those resources potentially have application for anything from the development of pharmaceuticals to food supplements to cosmetics. There is quite a bit of wealth that lies on the deep seabed. Some of it already discovered, some of it known, some of it that is yet to be discovered. But the essential point is that there could be potential great economic benefit or commercial benefit there from the exploitation of those resources, and that is to be shared among all countries on the planet. So another aspect of the negotiations that particularly concerned the Caribbean region would have been the sharing of benefits and modalities for doing that. In addition to those 2, be concentrated on capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. But having said all of that,
Yes, yes, sir. Having said all of that, your time is up. Of course, you could come back.
so I shall wrap up then.
Wrap up, thank you.
So, all that to say that Barbados has remained at the forefront of these discussions, being a coastal state itself, knowing that the oceans represent our final frontier, and knowing that the resources in the area and the potential benefits that can be accrued from the exploitation of those resources are to be shared among all of us, and not just those who are most powerful or better able to do so because of their current technological advances, while leaving the rest of us behind. So that, in a nutshell, is it from me as far as my perspective goes from my position at my desk. Thanks.
I want to thank the Senior Foreign Service Officer, Mr. Chairman, who I know does not normally like to be placed in these circumstances, but who I have the greatest confidence in that he will deliver. Sir, may I just also say to you that in this matter where we are breaking new ground and new frontiers, there is the Deputy Chief of Mission in Ghana, who has played an incredible role in this process, Juliet Bab Riley, and is now recognized as an international expert on the fight against planetary challenges such as biodiversity loss, and the types of things that we've just discussed with respect to this fair. And we, again, are very indebted to the work of those in Mission for the support that they give to us, though they're not at capital, but they are proving their weight worth in gold as they function from overseas.
I just want to say thanks to your ministry for protecting our intellectual property, because that is what it boils down to at the end of the day. But I want to end with a simple maxim to Barbadians. It goes like this: life on this world, in this world, began with biodiversity. It will end abruptly without it. So I want to thank your ministry for your work and your efforts as it relates to protecting that which will save this country. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd beg to move that report progress is on the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again.
The question is that I do not report progress to His Honour the Speaker. Beg for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. I think the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that this honourable chamber be now suspended until 11:30 this morning.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 11:30 a.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the yes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 11:30 a.m.